It's always an honor to have Caroline Glick on the program. She's born in America. She's an Israeli citizen, might still be a U.S. citizen for all I know. Mm-hmm. She's one of the great columnists and thinkers in Israel, as far as I'm concerned. How are you, Caroline?
Great to be back on your show. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Just tell us, what the hell is going on in Israel?
Well, tomorrow we're going to have an incredible hearing before a full complement of the Supreme Court, which has never happened. All 15 justices are going to be sitting to decide on what's called a basic law and whether to disqualify a basic law that talks about under what circumstances a prime minister can be ousted from office. And I mean, the law itself is less interesting than what's happening here. The source of the authority of the Supreme Court is, according to the Supreme Court itself, the basic laws of Israel. And they're not allowed to do anything that isn't based on those laws, which are passed by the Knesset, our parliament. And so what the Supreme Court is doing by having this hearing is they're setting up Israel for a civil war, effectively, because if they abrogate this law, then what they're saying is that there are no limits on their power, that the rule of law doesn't limit their power, that no law limits their power, that they get to decide the rules of the game for the government, for the elected branches of Israeli governance, the government and the Knesset, and they also get to decide the limits of their power, for which they accept zero, based on whatever they feel like. They just are leaving the mothership, and if this goes through, it's going to be very difficult to call Israel a democracy because we will actually just be officially a judicial tyranny. So that's starting tomorrow, and it's about what is it called when a prime minister is infirm and incapable of carrying out his duties. So the purpose of the legislature was always to say that, if you're struck by a stroke like Ariel Sharon was, or you're in a coma or whatever, then you obviously can't fulfill the office and you have to be removed from office. But our Attorney General wants to remove Benjamin Netanyahu from office, and so she was trying to expand the definition based on nothing. And so the Knesset went quickly to amend the existing law to make it clear that she couldn't just oust the prime minister because she didn't like the way he was behaving. And so they limited it so that you can only oust a prime minister from office if he's medically incapable of performing his duties.
And
the Supreme Court is going to be adjudicating this tomorrow with absolutely no legal authority whatsoever. That's what's happening in Israel.
So you understand, America, you don't need standing in Israel. The court can sit there and 25 people can send, hey, you ought to look into this. Or honestly, they can read it in the newspaper and decide on their own they want to look into something under some pretext. And it's basically a Politburo. That's what it is. It's not even a court anymore. It's a Politburo. It's been criticized in our country repeatedly, particularly the brainiac, so-called, behind it, a guy by the name of Barak, another Barak. And so really the people of Israel, Caroline Glick, have no recourse whatsoever when a judiciary, such as it is, rules that, hey, look, you can elect whomever you want, majority, minority, doesn't matter to us. We will have the final say. And by the way, our final say will always be of the left.
Absolutely, but they say we're going to move into a constitutional crisis. We've been in a constitutional crisis for a very long time. Certainly, we've been in a constitutional crisis since 2 years ago, when the Supreme Court ordered the Speaker of our Knesset to resign or hold elections for his replacement, because it was an idea that the left-wing opposition party was going to rule the country through the Knesset, because they had an operative majority essentially, but they couldn't form a government. And he said he wouldn't hold the elections, but he resigned. And then the Supreme Court said, "You're not allowed to resign. We fire you." And so they fired him, and they have absolutely no legal authority to do that. So we've basically been, since then, the clock has been running down. The Supreme Court has just been seizing all of the residual powers of the Knesset and of the government to oversee its operations. And the legal reform that everybody is screaming about and saying that this is going to be the end of Israel if we have this very limited judicial reform go forward, it's sort of a race against time to try to legislate a means to legislate limits on the court's power before they completely destroy democracy. And so what the outgoing Supreme Court President Esther Hayut plans to do is go out in a pillar of smoke. She retires at the end of next month. So she wants to make all of these judgments that destroy Israel's democracy before she has to leave. And so that's why she's rushing to undermine the last sort of vestiges of limits on the Supreme Court power, including in September, they're supposed to, in 2 weeks, they're supposed to, or sorry, 6 weeks, they're supposed to have a hearing to overturn the law that the Knesset passed a week and a half ago that limits the Supreme Court's authority to overturn government decisions. And so they are saying that without legal authority, there's no basis in law for anything that they're doing. To the contrary, the law stipulates that they're not allowed to do anything that undermines basic laws. And they're saying, well, we're going to do it anyway. And not only that, we're doing it in a matter that regards our own authorities. So talk about a conflict of interest. There's nothing more clear than that one. And so that's where we are right now. And you know, a friend of mine, a law professor, said to me the other day when we were talking about it, he said, you know, the Dred Scott decision, which came out in 1857, essentially guaranteed that the United States was going to go into civil war. Now, they didn't know in 1857, you know, when it would happen, but it essentially became inevitable. And it took 4 years for, you know, the shots to rain out at Fort Sumter and the beginning of the U.S. Civil War. And here, you know, it's the same thing. If the court is saying that the government and the Knesset have no powers whatsoever, we get to decide everything, including our own powers, then you know, there's going to, unless somebody on the left wakes up very quickly, unfortunately, you're saying we're taking away your ability to legislate. So now the only thing that you have left is confrontation. So it's very dangerous.
That's actually quite a brilliant point. When the system collapses, the law collapses, the law becomes the crime or the criminal conspiracy, and there's no way out.
No.
There's no way out.
They're locking us into a direct confrontation, which is why it's so terrifying, and why, you know, we were hoping that the president, who's sort of he's a figurehead. He's supposed to be the Israeli version of the monarch of Britain, but he had the gravitas initially to come in and sort of force the left that's, you know, running this insurrection being led by the Supreme Court to come to its senses, but he apparently didn't have the intestinal fortitude to rise to the occasion, and so that didn't happen. It's not clear right now, you know, what figure on the left who would be willing to take action has the gravitas to do so, and so we're in a pickle. That's right, we're in a problem.
Isn't it amazing
the position right now?
Isn't it amazing the left in most of these countries? And I want to hold you over the break. Mm-hmm. They are really Leninists. You know, it's top-down power while they claim to be representing the people, and there can be no disputes that disagree with them or anything of the kind. I mean, for a group of lawyers, that's what we're talking about, to seize authority that was never conferred on this court or any part of the government, basically changing the original nature of the government and the law under the founding of the State of Israel, even by many socialists, European socialists. They seize it, and they have no intention of giving it up. We're talking with Caroline Glick about the horrendous situation taking place in Israel. Caroline, with the support of radical left groups outside of Israel, like J Street, with support of propagandists who despise Israel, like Thomas Friedman, with the support of left-wing parties in your own country, Ehud Barak. Would you explain who he is and what he promoted?
Yeah, Ehud Barak is arguably the greatest failure ever to serve as a prime minister of Israel. He was the chief of staff of the army, also did a terrible job there. He sort of kept getting promoted up to another level of incompetence, and so he came in later as a defense minister. He was in office for 15 months, and then he was ousted in 2001. And then he served a couple of stints as defense minister, which he also did poorly, but whatever. The thing is that he has been pushing this idea of a mass revolt against the government by the elites of Israel for the past at least 3 years. The first time that we had a YouTube video of him discussing his plans for Israel was a video that he made in 2020 when he was talking about launching the kind of protests that we're seeing now, ostensibly about legal reform against the government, but in relation to the COVID-19 lockdown. So he was using any opportunity he could think of to promote mass violence and rebellion against Netanyahu's government with the aim of overthrowing it by tanking the economy and using leftists in key elite units in the IDF, like pilots in the Air Force and special forces operators, to try to compel the government to stand down or to foment its collapse. And so he's been doing this. He's very tied in with Democrats in the United States. He was very close with Jeffrey Epstein. He met with him 30 times after Epstein's initial conviction on was it child trafficking or whatever. And so, he has a really dubious relationship with a lot of the higher up in the United States. And so he's been promoting political discord and chaos in Israel. And then there was a video that came out, I think last week, where he was explaining to this group of pilots who now comprise sort of the main group of pilots who are threatening to take apart the Air Force if the government goes forward with judicial reform. Most of them retired from the cockpit a long, long time ago, but they're trying to gin up a psychological warfare campaign, at least against the public, and particularly against the government, into thinking that they have to stand down. But he explained to them that an expert told him that he will be summoned back to power when there are bodies of Jews killed by other Jews floating in the Yarkon River in Tel Aviv. And the idea was that he wants to foment a civil war so that he can be called to power like Petain or de Gaulle by a needy nation who looks to him for stability. And so he's very openly working to really destroy the country in order to advance his goal. And he's been sort of one of the central nodes of the insurrection, of all of the political violence that we've been seeing on the street, and organizing the various groups, high-tech people, former generals. Again, he was the former chief of staff of the IDF, and a lot of these economic moguls, these very, very wealthy Israelis, bankers, they're all sort of around him. And he has been raising the money, and part of it out of pocket because he's extremely wealthy, for these protests, or whatever you want to call them, that cost well over, we're talking probably now in the range of $40 million, $50 million, which is, way beyond anything we've ever seen in Israel. I mean, they have unlimited cash on hand from various sources to pay for this violence that they've been enacting on the streets of Israel.
And the role of the Biden administration, you've got this guy Malley, you've got Blinken, you've got the former ambassador to Israel from the United States. You have groups like J Street, you have the radical leftists within the Democrat Party. The role of the United States in undermining the state of Israel.
So from that perspective, the problem is, I mean, there is synergy between what the left is doing and what the Biden administration is doing. The Biden administration, you know, is pushing a policy of appeasing Iran and its proxies, particularly Hezbollah, which controls Lebanon for Iran, at Israel's expense and at the expense as well of Saudi Arabia and other U.S. allies, because the United States thinks that Israel is too powerful, and as Barack Obama put it when he was president, Israel has to be weaker, Saudi Arabia has to be weaker so that you can reach some sort of a balance of power with Iran, and through that balance of power, the Middle East will be stabilized. Of course, this is completely delusional, because Iran is not a status quo power. It's not interested in stability. It's a revolutionary regime that wants to export its Islamic revolution throughout the region, overturn all of the governments of the Muslim world, and turn them into satrapies the way it's destroyed Lebanon and Syria, Iraq, Yemen, etc. And they want to annihilate Israel. And they're developing nuclear weapons in order to achieve that purpose. And rather than and of course they want to destroy the United States as well, which they consider the great Satan. And so rather than confront Iran in any way, including through sanctions, which the Biden administration doesn't enforce, the Biden administration is appeasing Iran, and they're doing so by, among other things, working with the left in Israel to destabilize the government and paralyze it from action against Iran, both because of domestic political constraints and then because of actions that the United States is taking in the region. So yeah, it's sort of a perfect storm from that perspective, and really it was very heartening, I have to say, when a week and a half ago, despite everything that the Biden administration is doing, and the left, of course, is working with the Biden administration and openly calling for it to isolate Israel and not to meet with, and for the president not to meet with Netanyahu in the White House or anywhere else, which of course he has not done. So I was very heartened when they passed the law limiting judicial power in a very, very tiny way, but all the same, the fact that they passed it showed that Netanyahu is still standing strong against incredible odds and trying to protect Israeli democracy. He said so in a couple of interviews. I'm not sure if it was in the interview that he gave you as well, but I saw that in one or two interviews he refused to say whether his government would abide by a Supreme Court decision that overturned the basic law that they just passed a week and a half ago, limiting the Supreme Court's power to overturn government decisions. What he did say that was very important was that we will follow the law, and we go with the law. And the point that he was making was that an illegal Supreme Court decision that is made without any authority, legal authority whatsoever, to reject limits on its power duly constituted as a basic constitutional law by the Knesset with the express purpose of limiting the Supreme Court's power, that would be an illegal judgment, which of course is correct. Whether he's going to have the wherewithal and the power to actually refuse to implement a Supreme Court decision, given the situation on the ground with these leftist insurrectionists who really are the most powerful forces in Israeli society, is still an open question. But at least, A, they passed the law, which was really important, and B, Netanyahu is signaling very clearly that he's not willing to throw in the towel. So both of those points are very heartening.
We're going to have to go. You've been very, very informative. I will say this. It reminds me like of the fall of the Second Temple.
Yeah.
Well, the Romans are attacking. Hold on now.
Okay, sorry.
For the American people, while the Romans are attacking the Jews at the Second Temple, they're fighting among themselves. And this is what concerns me a whole lot, Caroline, is that Iran is at the precipice. Others are at the precipice. And the country's falling apart. And by the way, our country here is falling apart, too. Anyway, any final words?
Well, just two things. One is I'm writing a book about this, so keep this space open. I'll talk to you when the book is out. And
I look forward to that.
Thanks. And the other thing is that I believe very strongly that a majority of Israelis, a very large majority of Israelis, are not going to allow this ship to go asunder. And we're facing a problem unlike any that we've seen before, largely because so much of this is propelled by internal, by a very powerful force inside of Israel that rejects the legitimacy of the rest of Israeli society. But I think that if, particularly with the help of our friends in the United States, and if we hear more voices of support on the Hill, in the Senate, for Israeli democracy, for the legitimacy of elections in Israel, then I think that that's going to have an impact. It's very impactful. They always report expansively what Tom Friedman writes in the New York Times, make it seem as though he is so important, which of course we both know is untrue. It would be very wonderful if we could hear more voices of support from people in the United States who understand the importance of maintaining democracy in America, in Israel, and throughout the world.
All right, you're terrific. We appreciate it. Now give your sites.
Oh, okay. My website is CarolynGlick.com. My name is spelled Caroline Glick, so CarolynGlick.com. And also you can follow me on Twitter. And I'm also the senior editor at jns.org, the most important and best news site in English in Israel. And so you can follow me there as well and get updates on Israel from jns.org.
Every now and then I show up in Israeli media. Isn't that funny?
We love you.
It's hilarious.
We just love you, Mark.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you, too. Appreciate it.
Right.
Hope to get over there in a few months.
Me too. And then you can be on my podcast.
See that? Absolutely. All right. Well, God bless. Thank you very much.
God bless.
All right. Take care.